When a philandering chemistry professor wins the Nobel Prize, his disgruntled son finds himself in grave danger. Still, the young man attempts to make the most out of the situation to teach his vile father a lesson. Barclay Michelson works on his thesis at Equator Books and takes advantage of their free milk and snacks since his father gives him a low allowance. Meanwhile, his father, Eli, a chemistry professor, is intimate with his student, Beth, in his office. After their time, the woman complains about her low grade before storming off. At the police station, Eli's wife, Sarah, a forensic psychiatrist, delivers a lecture to officers, and Max, a detective, is present. Elsewhere, Thaddeus James, an autodidact, is at home timing himself while assembling something. Soon, the professor receives a phone call informing him that he's been awarded the Nobel Prize. While he basks in his glory, his son is appalled by the news. During the university's celebratory dinner, Thaddeus lurks around. Suddenly, Beth appears, declaring her love for Eli. As the professor escorts her out, Beth demands a higher grade, threatening to tarnish his reputation. The professor acquiesces before returning to the party. Later, Eli delivers his speech where he commends Sarah's endurance of his eccentricities, but makes backhanded compliments about his son's pursuit of studying cannibalism and video games instead of following in his footsteps. Because of this, Barclay excuses himself to attend a poetry reading, so Sarah reminds him to be home in time for their flight to Stockholm to receive the Nobel Prize. Barclay bikes to the bookstore for City Hall's poetry reading. Unbeknownst to him, Thaddeus is also present. After City finishes, Barclay approaches her, introducing himself as a broke PhD candidate. Though their interaction seems awkward, he saves it by quoting a rock song that highlights their shared experience of having terrible fathers. As they step outside, Barclay discovers that his bike has been stolen, so City offers him a ride home. In her car, Barclay notices a paper bag mask which he puts on. The artist drives to an ATM where she convinces Barclay to get his account balance while wearing the mask to prove that he's broke. As he uses the machine, she yells his name, telling him to hurry up. Upon confirming that he didn't lie, the artist invites him to her home, where they make love under the stars. In the morning, Barclay hasn't arrived home, so Eli insists on leaving without him. With no choice, Sarah entrusts her son's plane tickets to George Kastner, the tenant of their garage apartment. Finally, Barclay wakes up and hurriedly gets dressed. He takes $20 from the table and leaves an IOU note for City. Unable to find his shoes, he runs barefoot and hurriedly gets inside a taxi. He arrives home but finds no one there, even though the fireplace is lit. Just then, Thaddeus knocks him out. Moments later, Eli calls, expressing disdain for his son's behavior. Hearing the Nobel laureate prompts Thaddeus to vent his anger on Barclay. Outside, George waits for Barclay to take him to the airport on his way to work. Once George gives up on waiting, Thaddeus stuffs his hostage inside his red Mini Cooper, disconnects the phone, and drives away. At the airport, Sarah tries calling the house but can't get through. Soon, Annalea, their Swedish guide, urges them to board the plane. Eventually, Barclay finds himself handcuffed while his captor is engrossed in disassembling and reassembling a car. Later, he finds Thaddeus wearing a lineman's uniform. The kidnapper then calls the Michelsons and tases Barclay to silence him. In Stockholm, the parents receive Thaddeus's call. The disguised voice demands $2 million in exchange for his son, but Eli assumes it's Barclay, so he orders him to fly to Sweden immediately, then hangs up. Thaddeus can't believe that a father would treat their son that way. The kidnapper considers severing Barclay's thumb to inspire urgency, so the captive begs to talk to his father to convince him instead. The kidnapper agrees, but plays church bells during the call. Eli receives the call, so Barclay reports that he's been kidnapped. However, his father is only concerned about the award ceremony, commanding him again to board a flight immediately before hanging up. He then assures his wife that their son is on his way before marching off. Barclay laments that the Nobel Prize has made his father's behavior worse. The kidnapper exclaims that the professor doesn't deserve the award, since the idea he won it for was stolen from Harryman James, Thaddeus's father. The man then reveals photographs of the professor with other women, including Harriman's wife, who soon got pregnant. He explains that Harriman was the one who conceived the idea that garnered Eli the Nobel Prize, and shows his father's notes as proof. Barclay realizes his captor's biological father is Eli, so when his half-brother brandishes a knife, he desperately offers to collaborate in the kidnapping scheme. That night, Eli formally receives his Nobel Prize. The celebrations are halted when the Michelsons discover a package containing a severed thumb, a photograph of Barclay, and a demand for $2 million. The parents hastily fly back home, and Max is informed of the situation. The detective soon picks them up, reporting that the analysis on the thumb will take time. Meanwhile, George is questioned about the day of Barkley's disappearance. When Max and the parents arrive at the house, an officer informs them that their search of churches based on the bells Eli heard has yielded nothing. Sarah mentions that Barkley went to Equator Books to meet a lady, so Max notes this as a lead. The police then set up equipment in the Michelson residence, hoping to trace the call when the kidnapper contacts them. That night, Sarah can't sleep, so Max makes her a snack, slyly hinting at his feelings for her. They divert the topic to the kidnapping, and Max thinks the thumb may not belong to Barkley. Surprisingly, Sarah hopes that it is her son's, since it'll mean the kidnapper is sloppy and easier to catch. The following day, Max proceeds to Equator Books and speaks with Clifford, the manager, who confirms that Barkley was with City that night. Clifford also points out an abandoned bicycle outside the bookstore, which he believes belongs to the captive. Meanwhile, at the mall, Thaddeus changes the dialogue of an animatronic Santa Claus to shout obscenities. While shoppers are distracted, he slips under the red Mini Cooper for the mall's raffle and adds a modification. That night, Thaddeus finally makes the anticipated call. Sarah is instructed to place $2 million in the trunk of the red Mini Cooper at the mall by Sunday morning. She's then told to return home and wait for Barkley's location. She requests proof of life, and Barkley, now conspiring with Thaddeus with both thumbs intact, puts on a strained voice for his mother. After the call ends, the officers announce that they successfully traced the call. 2 days earlier, Thaddeus revealed that he sent the Michelsons another person's severed thumb. He explained that it was needed to capture their attention, continuing that he had everything planned. After the call, the police stormed the wrong house, drawing their focus away from the mall just as Thaddeus planned. During this, the mall receives an unexpected shipment, but the construction crew ignores it during the weekend, which the mastermind also planned. On Sunday morning, Thaddeus uses the employee entrance at the mall over an hour before the drop-off. This allows him to make his way to the construction site and reassemble another Mini Cooper, whose parts were in the unscheduled shipment. In the parking lot, Eli hesitates handing over his Nobel Prize money, so Sarah takes it, asserting that their son's safety is paramount. At opening hours, Barkley enters the mall in disguise amidst the crowd eagerly anticipating the Christmas raffle. Moments later, Sarah enters with the suitcase and deposits it in the trunk. Seeing this, Barkley puts his video game skills to use as he remotely controls the mall's Mini Cooper to cause havoc. Meanwhile, Thaddeus' assembly at the construction site is running behind schedule, so he resorts to duct taping the remaining parts. The officers chase the driverless car around the mall. As Barkley positions it to crash through the construction site, Thaddeus paints skid marks to deceive the pursuers further. After the Mini Cooper crashes into the construction site, Barkley switches his controls to the newly assembled car. The new vehicle breaks through the other side, drawing the officers' attention while the one with the money remains inside. Thaddeus retrieves the money, transfers it into a garbage bag, and throws it into a waste chute. Afterward, the mastermind changes his uniform and exits through another shop to collect his reward. Barkley also leaves while the police surround the switched car. The brothers soon drive to a secluded diner in disguise, securing the money in one of the lockers. Barkley then swallows the key to hide it from the authorities and then return to their hideout. As Barkley changes back into his clothes, Thaddeus attacks him to make the kidnapping look real. At the Michelsons, news of the abduction has spread, causing reporters to gather outside. When the phone rings, everyone jumps, hoping for contact from the kidnappers. But it turns out to be a reporter outside. Irritated, Sarah points her gun at the reporter, causing the media to scatter. She then excuses this behavior since they don't have call waiting. Eventually, Thaddeus calls, and Barkley is reunited with his parents. During the ride home, Eli notices that his son still has both thumbs, making him question whose thumb they received. As Barkley lies in bed later, Max interrogates him, though he remains vague about his supposed 2 kidnappers. The detective then asks if City was involved, so Barkley asserts that she isn't, telling the detective to keep her out of the investigation. Instead, he shares that he was abducted inside the house, so the officers deem the place as the initial crime scene. Late at night, Barkley watches TV and sees Will Cavalieri's interview about his thumb being severed by someone wearing a paper bag mask at the ATM. Will describes the mask as identical to the one City made Barkley wear. When the realization hits Barkley, he gets sick. The next day, Max visits City to hear her story. The artist explains that she offered Barkley a ride after his bike was stolen, but the man took a cab home the next day, despite claiming he had no money. Before leaving her apartment, the detective discreetly takes one of City's art, which he later shows to Sarah. The woman's work makes the forensic psychiatrist ponder whether she was involved in the kidnapping. Max then interviews George, who confirms that he didn't hear any signs of a struggle inside the house. Meanwhile, Barkley is checking if the key has left his body when Max knocks at his door. The detective reveals that his bike is in the garage after he found it outside Equator Books, despite the young man insisting that it was stolen. This leaves the young man puzzled. The next day, Barkley is at the park while forensics searches his house, where remnants of a paper bag mask are discovered in the fireplace. Elsewhere, Max questions the cabbie who drove Barkley home. The driver recalls that the passenger seemed anxious, casting doubt on the kidnapping. Meanwhile, Thaddeus approaches George and begins listing the numerous psychiatric hospitals the man has been admitted to. At the park, City meets with Barkley, who didn't think she'd come. The artist expresses her desire to be with him, but reveals that she's with someone else. She then apologizes and walks away, leaving Barkley confused. When Barkley returns home that night, he and his mother discover that their tenant has taken his own life. Days later, Sarah tours someone interested in the garage apartment. To Barkley's surprise, the new tenant is Thaddeus and his girlfriend, City. That night, the Michelsons invite their new tenants for dinner, and Eli is impressed by Thaddeus' knowledge of chemistry. This pisses Barkley off, more so when his father compares him to Thaddeus. After dinner, Sarah witnesses Barkley barging into the garage apartment. Inside, Barkley snarls that this wasn't part of their plan, but Thaddeus basks in Eli's attention, saying a son must make his father proud. Hearing this, Barkley storms off, realizing that the man's true motive is to insert himself into his family. Meanwhile, at home, Max watches CCTV footage of the ATM where Will was attacked. There, he finds someone wearing a paper bag mask while a woman calls the person Barkley. In the following footage, Max sees Will's attack by someone wearing the same paper bag mask. The next day, Max arrives to report footage showing Barkley at the ATM on the night he went missing. Barkley clarifies that his account had no money, so he borrowed $20 from City for the taxi and left her a note about it. However, the detective remarks that City didn't mention a note. Max continues that Will was attacked at the ATM on the same night, and the assailant wore a paper bag mask. Fragments of the same mask with traces of Will's blood were found in their fireplace. Barkley is perplexed because he returned home barefoot after leaving City's apartment, but the detective doubts him, thinking that the young man staged his own kidnapping. After Max departs, Sarah has a serious discussion with her son. That afternoon, a deranged Barkley breaks into the garage apartment, expressing his frustration of losing City before abruptly leaving. Thaddeus approaches Sarah afterward, reporting Barkley's intrusion. Sarah assures him that she'll talk to her son, then asks the man for assistance with the measuring cup. Later, the forensic psychologist has the fingerprints on the cup run through the criminal database. That night, Barkley discovers old checks made out to Glynis James, signed by his father. Just then, Sarah arrives and reports that 3 years ago, City escaped from a psychiatric facility where she was confined alongside Thaddeus. Records also show that the Michelsons were friends with the James family years ago. The next day, Sarah claims that she'll be on FBI business over the weekend, and snarkily remarks that Beth can keep her husband company. Later, Max talks to Thaddeus, warning him that Barkley is deceptively dangerous and suggests taking City away for her safety. Hearing this, the man immediately heads to City's apartment but finds it flooded with blood. Meanwhile, Barkley abducts his father. Shaken, Thaddeus returns home and discovers Barkley's locker key. He drives to the diner, but he discovers an envelope with a CD inside the locker instead of cash. The CD contains threats against City's and their father's lives, demanding a ransom of $1 million for Eli's release. Elsewhere, Eli finds himself restrained by his son, who confronts him about Harriman James. Barkley reveals that his father's affair with his wife and the theft of his research ultimately led Harriman to take his own life. When Barkley shows his father the regular checks, Eli insists they were his way of helping out a friend. Barkley doubts this since his father has been unkind throughout his life. He then reveals Harriman's notes, which he obtained from Thaddeus. This will be enough proof to strip his father of his Nobel Prize, leaving Eli speechless. When Sarah arrives home that night, Thaddeus shows her the CD bearing Barkley's threats. She suggests going to the police, but he insists it's a bluff. Just then, a delivery arrives for Thaddeus, containing what appears to be a woman's chest, proving that Barkley isn't bluffing. Suddenly, Barkley calls, providing instructions on where to deliver the $1 million ransom. Thaddeus complies with everything, but when he leaves the bus station where he dropped off the money, he finds his car missing. Thaddeus takes a cab back to his apartment, where he finds his missing car inside. Sirens sound from afar, so he decides to use Barkley's bicycle to escape. As he struggles to remove the bike from the rack, the weight of the car and its exertion cause the floor to collapse, burying him under the wreckage. The following day, Max retrieves the money that Thaddeus left. Meanwhile, Barkley shows his father more pictures of his inappropriate behavior. Soon, Sarah appears, announcing her plans for a divorce. Eli doubts this since he believes his wife needs his money, but the woman reveals that she has a DNA test that proves Thaddeus' paternity. This and Harriman's notes will call his Nobel Prize into question. Thus, Sarah threatens her soon-to-be ex to comply with the divorce. Accepting defeat, the Nobel laureate attributes the entire scheme to Sarah, but she reveals it was their son's idea. This allows Barkley to prove to his father that he's a genius in his own way. After successfully using all of Thaddeus' tricks against him, Sarah and Barkley retreat to a tropical beach. Moments later, Max appears, carrying the $1 million ransom that Thaddeus paid, which he hands to Sarah. The two kiss before the detective surrenders the surveillance tapes from the mall to Barkley, which proves that he was an accomplice in his kidnapping. Still, the detective can't figure out the package they sent to Thaddeus, so Barkley reveals it was made of marzipan, and the blood in City's apartment was bought online. City is actually safe and back at the psychiatric facility. Soon, Barkley publishes his thesis on cannibalism while continuing life by the beach. Meanwhile, Eli maintains his teaching position and status as a Nobel laureate while continuing to flirt with his attractive students. Thus, the troublesome family achieves their own happy endings.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.